Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our co-sponsored, co-produced webinar here tonight between the Canadian Childcare Federation, the Early Childhood Educators of BC, and the Westcoast Childcare Resource Centre based in Vancouver. It is our pleasure to have you here tonight, and of course our pleasure to have Dr. Laura Doan presenting peer mentoring for early childhood educators. Before we start, sorry, excuse me, just lost my screen for a moment. Just to recognize that I am speaking to you today from Treaty 1 lands, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, the Dakota, and Dene peoples on the homeland of the Métis Nation. I respect the treaties that have been made here on all territories as well, and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and dedicate myself and ourselves as an organization to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And on that, my name is Doan Giesbrecht. I am the CEO of the Canadian Childcare Federation, and like I said, it's a pleasure to have you all here today. So before we get into the webinar, we can see that folks are still joining us here, which is great. Many of you have been in this platform, this Webinar Jam platform, so some of this is going to be old news to you, but a few things of note for everybody before we get started. Number one, in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you're going to see a signal, or it's got 5 bars there. Hopefully it has 5 bars there, which says that you have a very strong signal. If you are having issues with video breakup or audio breakup and you're not seeing things, it's because your signal's not strong enough. So take a look at that, and if you can, move closer to your Wi-Fi point, your router, whatever the case may be. So that's number one. Number two, if you look on your menu there is a chat function. And of course, I'm seeing lots of folks already starting to chat. We've got a lot of people from Vancouver. We've got folks from Winnipeg. I'm seeing some folks from the East Coast and from Ontario. This is great, absolutely great. We really do have a coast to coast to coast audience here today. Through the webinar today, Laura is going to launch some polls. She's going to have a video for you. She's going to obviously be sharing her slides about the work that she's presenting here tonight. But if you click on the Files button, you're going to find that Laura has actually provided a lot of different files for all of you to download, use how you want. There is already a copy of the slides in there in PDF, so just to answer that question for everybody. And you are welcome to, as I said, download those. Now, one other thing, because this comes up all the time as well, you will get a certificate for attending. Those certificates are automatically generated by the system. The Canadian Childcare Federation, ECBC, Laura, Westcoast Childcare Resource Centre, we do not control those certificates, just to be really clear, okay? It will be generated by the system, sent out to you automatically. And the other thing I'll say about it is that if you did not register individually and you're listening with another person, you won't get a certificate in your name. It only goes to the person who registered, okay? If you don't receive it within, let's say, 48 hours or so, by all means, give us send us an email and we can look into it as best we can. But there are some parameters in and around that. There will be a copy of this webinar available to everybody should they want. We're going to make it available to ECBC and to Laura and for the Federation and the West Coast Childcare Resource Centre, etc. And so we will have that out there for all of you as well. So without any further instructions from me, I hope that was all clear, but by all means, if I missed over something, send me a comment privately, or you can certainly put it in the chat for everybody to see if that's okay as well. I will pass it over to my good friend Pam Preston to introduce Laura.
Thank you very much, Dawn. It is exciting watching the chat box. I can hardly keep my eyes from it. I'm coming to you today from Vancouver, otherwise known as the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I'm very happy today to introduce our presenter for this evening, Dr. Laura Doan. Laura is an associate professor in the Faculty of Education and Social Work at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, BC, where she teaches in the early childhood education and Master of Education programs. Laura received her BA at the University of Victoria in Human and Social Development, majoring in child and youth care with a minor in early childhood education. She went on to receive her Master's in Education in Early Childhood Education, and in 2014, she completed her Doctor of Education in Leadership in the Post-Secondary Setting at the University of Calgary. Throughout her academic career, Laura has focused on developing an understanding of early childhood educators, their experiences joining the field, what keeps them in the field, and how best to support their resilience. The peer mentoring project for ECEs in BC was funded by the federal government through the Canada-BC Early Learning and Childcare Agreement. Westcoast was honored to receive this funding and to work with Laura and her amazing team on this project. And now let me turn this presentation over to my friend, Laura Doan. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you both, Dawn and Pam. And I'm just going to start my presentation here. And it looks like I might be at the end. We'll see. All right. Sorry about this, but I'm just going to have to go right to the beginning here. Wouldn't be complete if there wasn't a little technical difficulty. So thank you for your patience with this.
We're getting a great preview, Laura.
Well, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Great. Just trying to get to the, you are going to have time for questions. So that's pretty great. Thanks, everybody. And I was pretty excited as well to hear that you are writing some things in the chat. Really excited to be part of this tonight. Yeah, so thankful for every one of you that is here tonight. And I'm hoping this is our one technical difficulty. We'll see. We're almost at the beginning. Almost there. All right, here we are at the beginning. Thank you so much for your patience. I wasn't really sure how to get up to the beginning other than just going back. So it is wonderful to be here tonight. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight. And I know that we do have people from across Canada. And if you're in BC, then it's just after 5, but I know it's much later as we go east. So really appreciate you being here. And I think Dawn might have said this, but in case he didn't, our hope is to be about an hour, just so that you have an idea of the time commitment that you're making. So as others have already shared, I would like to give a land acknowledgement as well. So I am coming to you from Kamloops, British Columbia, which is on the traditional, unceded, and ancestral homeland of the Secwepemc Nation within Secwepemc Ulu. And I recognize that this homeland has always been a place of teaching, learning, and research. And I'm really thankful that I can be here tonight. So you'll have to forgive my poor attempt at a joke, but I have been teaching in the post-secondary for over 20 years, and often you maybe you've even heard a joke like this where people say, "I hope you're in the right class," and then people share with you what the class is. So I hope you're in the right webinar. I hope we don't have people just starting to leave all of a sudden. But this webinar is Peer Mentoring for Early Childhood Educators, a powerful approach for connection, inspiration, and retention. And again, really thankful for you and for this time to share about this project. So I'm beginning with this photo of many of the facilitators who were part of this project. Not all are included in this photo, but this was taken at an orientation event that we held back in August 2019. And it's important for me to start with this photo as it illustrates that many have been part of this journey. This includes Dr. Sun Young Jang, the project manager our 20 facilitators, 200 early childhood educators, our graduate research assistants, and our project assistant. Truly, this has been a team effort. So this is our plan for the webinar, and we will be keeping an eye on the time and trying to keep this to an hour. As we've mentioned, please feel free to use the chat. We will have time for questions about halfway through, as well as at the end. And we will have a couple of polls that will hopefully get some interaction happening. And as Dawn already mentioned, you will also have an opportunity to get the slides. In fact, they're already uploaded to the files. So don't worry too much if I go through the slides quicker than maybe you're needing them. You'll still be able to access them later. So I'd like to start with this, looking at the context in British Columbia. And this statistic that 50% of beginning early childhood educators leave the field in the first 5 years of work has really motivated me and has impacted the direction of my research. So this is actually our first time for a poll. So I really want to hear from you in terms of what your thoughts are on why early childhood educators leave the field in the first 5 years of work. So I'm just going to get our poll happening. So I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see a poll happening and you'll be able to, yeah, people are definitely starting to have perspectives. This is great. Sharing your thoughts on why up to 50% of beginning early childhood educators leave the field in the first 5 years of work. I recognize that all of you have so many experiences and you bring that right now. You have your own experience that you've lived and working in the field of early learning. You've also experienced, well, you've had your own experience, but of course, working within a context with other early childhood educators as well. So you know why educators leave. All right. So I can see definitely many of you talked about indicated wages and benefits being a factor, and that's no surprise to me at all. As well as most of you talked about all of the above. So wages and benefits, working conditions, lack of recognition, and lack of career paths. These are all aspects in terms of why educators leave the field. When we think about the context in British Columbia, and again, I know that we have people from across Canada, so I would invite you to think about your own context. Are there statistics that you can think about for your own context? I know in British Columbia, educators have a fairly short period of time in the post-secondary setting. And additionally, another aspect is a lack of structured support. And what I mean by that is there isn't really a formal way for new early childhood educators to receive support once they begin their work. It doesn't mean they won't get support, but there isn't a formal structured way of getting support. So one new early childhood educator described her experience this way. When I walked in, it was very much sink or swim. It was, here's the room, here's the kids, take care of them. And you're going to hear lots of different quotes from people that have been part of my research, because I'm really trying to bring some of those stories forward. So this image shows some of the issues facing new early childhood educators. And of course, all of these issues impact experienced educators as well. But they may have developed coping strategies that have allowed them to continue on in the profession. So another educator from the current study that I'm talking about from Port Alberni shared this. A huge topic that popped up already was self-care and burnout. I was surprised after only being in the field a full year, this was already a topic my partner wanted to chat about, which made me question why. So my research with peer mentoring for early childhood educators really began with looking at beginning early childhood educators in BC. And specifically, I was interested in what their experiences were in the first 5 years of work, as well as what their needs were. So you can see from this slide that out of the research, the key findings from the educators were that the work is overwhelming yet deeply satisfying. Induction support is haphazard. And when I talk about induction support, really it's those things in that third bullet. So looking at having access to peer mentoring, having access to professional development, feedback, observations. And when I say it's haphazard, educators might get the support, they might not. Again, we don't have a structured way of ensuring that new educators receive support. And the last major finding from the work was that new educators wanted an induction program. They thought that there should be some kind of induction support for beginning educators that would include things like mentoring or peer support, observations, feedback, and professional development. So I think this shows a real recognition that the work is complex, that the support needed is ongoing beyond the post-secondary setting. And one educator in this study said there weren't staff right there who I could ask for help or assistance or to remind me of something that needed to be done. It was very much hit the ground running on your own. So I took the results from my research with beginning early childhood educators, and I created peer mentoring projects in the interior of British Columbia. And in my research, I have intentionally worked with early childhood educators, believing that if I want to support educators, I need to go to them to find out what their ideas are about what they need. So you can see in this diagram some of the different aspects that were part of that initial pilot project. And again, this came directly out of what early childhood educators told me that they were looking for. Additionally, I also found from doing a literature review and looking at peer mentoring and mentoring projects elsewhere, that there really isn't a one-size-fits-all project. So there isn't just a only one way of doing it. The idea is what I gleaned from the research was to set up structures so that people can access what they need and what they want. So in the pilot project, educators shared an awareness of the value of peer mentoring, greater connection to the ECE community, an increase in their own knowledge and skills. And this was out of the responsive professional development. So again, you're going to hear about the professional development that happened within the provincial peer mentoring project, but it started in the pilot project. Very much the professional development comes from the educators themselves. So it's not a top-down approach of what the facilitator thinks the educators need, but really looking at the educators about what is their interest, what are their questions, what would they like to know more about. And then there was an increase in teacher efficacy or educator efficacy. And really, this is an educator's confidence in their own abilities. And that's been shown to be tied directly to burnout. So one educator said, one of the reasons why ECEs burn out so quickly, they're overworked and they're not valued. And I think that peer mentorship will, having those constant valuing comments and support, it would sustain us a lot in this field. So the project that I'm going to tell you about now, it came about through funding by the Ministry of Children and Family Development through Westcoast Childcare Resource Centre. And this was a partnership with Thompson Rivers University, where I teach, in collaboration with ECEBC, the professional association representing early childhood educators in BC. And with this funding, I was able to take the project from a local level to a provincial level, involving many more early childhood educators. And I just want to say that this project did not happen on its own or independently. It is based on previous research, as I've tried to share a little bit just in the last couple of minutes. And it could take place because of great work that had been done previously in both organizations. For example, ECEBC has been providing leadership projects for educators across the province for many years. And projects like these help to build capacity in the field, and this enabled the success of the peer mentoring project. So the purpose of this project was to support the ongoing professional development needs of beginning and experienced early childhood educators. Specifically, we hope to slow the number of educators who leave the field. Additionally, we aim to build the capacity of ECEs. And I tend to, if you haven't caught on already, I tend to use ECEs to shorten early childhood educators. That's what I'm talking about there. And we wanted to support their ongoing professional identity development, as well as to increase their levels of educator efficacy, or again, their confidence in their own abilities. And again, this is based on, I've already said this once, but worth repeating, it's based on the understanding that the work of early childhood educators is complex. It's intellectual work. And it's not simple, despite some of the messages that we hear from society. So this project was built on the current structure that is present throughout the existing individual ECEBC branches across the province of BC, of which there are 19. So the project itself took place in 17 communities across BC. Each community had 1 or 2 facilitators, and the facilitators have been instrumental in this project. And the network that exists through ECEBC was hugely helpful in recruiting the facilitators. So again, I hope I'm giving some concrete examples in terms of the partnerships that we had. Okay, so in this slide, I'm going to be sharing a little bit about the project itself. I'm going to share a little bit about the fact that we used the peer mentoring model. We also used a community of practice model, but I have a poll. So I'm just going to go to polls and just need to get to the right one. And you're going to see that a poll is going to come up for you. And I'm curious to know, have you been a peer mentor to an early childhood educator? So you've got a few options there. Yes, formally, yes, but informally. Some maybe a question, what is a peer mentor? And a lot of people, and then you can say no as well. So I'm just going to give you a minute or two for that. All right, I'm still, oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. So I can see that looks like many of you saying yes, 66% saying yes. And interesting to see some of you saying formally, others of you saying informally, some people with some questions about peer mentoring, and then some people saying no. So thank you for taking part in that. I wanted to include the informal as well as the formal, just because sometimes peer mentoring happens and it may not be through a project. It was interesting because one of the participants in my initial research with beginning early childhood educators, he talked about finding a mentor, and it wasn't through a mentoring project. It was really interesting to hear him describe it. You know, he literally looked around the room that he was working in, and he just thought, who is someone that I can go to and I can get support from? And that person became his mentor. So again, good for us to just remember that it doesn't have to be a formal peer mentoring program or project. It might be just something that you're doing to support another educator. So thank you for taking part in that. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the communities of practice. So I mentioned that we had 17 different communities that we were involved in. And in each of the 17 communities, there was what we called a community of practice. And again, I don't have a poll for this, but some of you will be very familiar with communities of practice. Maybe you're in one or you've participated in one, and others of you, it might be a newer concept. So each community of practice included 12 educators, 6 newer educators, 6 more experienced educators, along with a facilitator. And in a community of practice, each voice is valued and respected. The idea is that learning happens from within the group. We also used a peer mentoring model, as I know you've heard about already, as new early childhood educators acknowledged that they had value and had things to contribute in a mentoring relationship. So by using a non-hierarchical approach, we hope that learning would occur for both new and experienced early childhood educators. And the individual communities of practice had autonomy about what they chose to do in terms of professional development. And the hope was that this would help educators to identify and focus on their own motivations and or interests, and also encourage educator efficacy, so educators' confidence in themselves. The structure of this has been purposely left open and is flexible to allow individual communities of practice to determine what their interests are. Okay. So the peer mentoring relationship was an opportunity for educators to connect on both a personal and a professional level. Educators reported sharing things that were happening in their personal lives as well as their professional lives. And educators talked about everything from local things like their own individual early learning programs, their community, to provincial initiatives such as in British Columbia, the BC Early Learning Framework, as well as issues at the national and international level. So confidentiality and trust are huge, and educators have told us repeatedly about the importance of having a confidentiality agreement. And I know there might even be people that are listening tonight, taking part in the webinar, who are thinking about their own communities and thinking about how you might take some of these findings and apply it to your individual context. Confidentiality, I cannot stress that enough. That really created safety for people to share truly what was happening for them, what was going on for them. The community of practice and the peer mentoring is all about relationship, very much like what we see as early childhood educators. And in this project, there were multiple ways for educators to take part. We've gone with the peer mentoring model rather than a traditional mentor-mentee model with an expert and novice. Again, as I've already said, new educators in previous research said that they wanted support, but they also had value and they could contribute. So an educator from Prince George said this: when you come together, it's creating a space for vulnerability, which I think is important. You can't really share that you might have a different opinion from someone if you don't feel safe being vulnerable. So we had many different opportunities for educators to take part in sharing their experiences in the project, and I'll be sharing some of those things as we keep going. Peer mentors met weekly, and you can see that they met in a variety of ways. They had options in terms of how they met. And one educator from Quesnel talked about it this way: connection. That was what I took away from this program. Not only connection with other early childhood educators in my community, but a connection with my own practice again. Having been in the field for as many years as some of us have been, we can often lose sight of what drew us to the field in the first place. But by mentoring colleagues new to the field, I was able to reestablish my passion for the profession. So benefits for both new and experienced educators. So this slide shows you that we definitely had participants in a range of size of communities. You can see that we had 59 participants from rural communities, and Statistics Canada has defined rural as being a community with fewer than 10,000 people. So this meant that we were able to provide access to educators in rural areas, such as in the West Coast area near Tofino and Ucluelet, and the Southern Gulf Islands group, which met on Salt Spring. One educator from the West Coast community of practice shared, I think one of the things being isolated out here is we don't have access to all the city resources, like the Child Care Resource Center, and being able to pick up bins and things like that. For example, the center I had been working at, we asked one of the educators in the group if she could help us with some of the Nuu-chah-nulth language and the children learning body parts and things like that. So we have a way through this to exchange resources that way, which is huge. And again, that's just a really concrete example of getting support, getting resources from the group, from the community of practice. So I've got a couple of slides here showing you part of a professional exhibit that we have created. And I do just want to acknowledge that I realize you won't necessarily, I don't think you'll be able to read much of that, but I still wanted to show it to you. And again, it'll be in the slides. Peer mentors and facilitators shared weekly and monthly reflections and photos, and we worked with a graphic designer to create a professional exhibit featuring the voices of early childhood educators. And again, the wisdom is coming from the early childhood educators. And I very much look forward to sharing this at public events when it is safe to do so. So another slide for you as well. Again, the hope is that we would be able to share this professional exhibit within the ECE field, but also with the general public. And the lesson here for me, and there have been many, give educators time for meaningful connections, and the conversations will be rich. And, you know, just one of the quotes there, when another educator listens, I feel validated and supported. So in each of the 17 communities that I visited, I encountered dedicated, passionate early childhood educators. And this research helped to uncover what sustains early childhood educators. The Peer Mentoring Project gave early childhood educators something that they are not used to having, time and time together. The professional development happened from within through the community of practice and the peer mentoring model. And through this model, educators benefited from the collective wisdom of the group. This is in contrast to educators who have felt isolated and alone. And you might recall one of the first quotes that I shared a few minutes ago from an educator who just was shown the room and kind of left on her own. Over 100 resources have been shared between the participants, and this includes things like websites, videos, books, articles, etc. And you can find these on our project website. One educator from Nanaimo said, the takeaway from this workshop was to discover the science of developmental trauma, understand the impact of attachment and connection on learning, develop skills for empowered nonviolent communication, find the magic with co-regulation, and enhance your professional capacity with self-care and compassion. So I realize, again, this is another slide where you're not necessarily going to be able to read the list of professional development activities on the right, but I did want to share this with you to give you an idea of the number of different ways that individual communities of practice connected with each other. The ideas came from the individual groups. So in the Bulkley Valley, for example, the community of practice hosted a sharing session with the greater ECE community. Two communities of practice groups on the island, Campbell River and Comox, they came together to host a workshop on boundary practice based on what the educators in the groups wanted. And the feedback on that workshop was amazing. And then Dawson Creek, they looked at art therapy as a means to support educators' self-care. And it was incredible to see the ways that educators identified and met their own professional development needs. And now it is time for some of your questions. So we're going to have some time for questions, and then we'll carry on with the presentation. I'm going to invite Dawn and Pam perhaps to put their videos back on, and we can have some questions and dialogue.
Thanks, Laura. That's great. Just before we get to the questions, so apologize, everybody. In terms of accessing the files, as I'm hearing from people in the chat, they are there. I guess, what my apology extends to this, that what I see from our admin side, and we've done many of these webinars, isn't what you're seeing on your end. So clearly I need to mentor myself to go and watch this, watch a webinar from the other end. But Allison messaged out here that the files are there just above where you type into the chat. No icon, just the word file on the left side and an arrow on the right to click on, and then they're all there for downloading. So Laura, just to pause there. Question here, Laura, for you. I've been following the Early Years Pedagogy Network, and I'm curious if the peer mentoring program also engaged with pedagogistas in BC programs.
Great question. We actually haven't. We've been working kind of side by side, and we're part of a group that meets with BC government, and Pam is part of that as well. So we're aware of each other's projects. I know for myself, for this particular project, and Pam can attest, it came about rather quickly, and I think going back to when we found out about the funding was kind of late spring of 2019, and we had our orientation August 2019, and it was running by September. But I have lots of admiration for that project, for the ECPN. In fact, some of our participants have completed the peer mentoring project and have then gotten involved with the ECPN. Some of them have actually become pedagogists as well.
Great. A lot of comments here, Laura, just in and around, boy, aren't people in BC fortunate to have this work and this network of support. And do you know whether this is happening in any other jurisdictions in Canada?
Great question. I believe that there was a national peer mentoring project happening maybe about a year and a half ago, but I'm not as familiar with that. And I know that there have been projects in the past in Ontario. There was I think it was called Mentoring Pairs for Childcare. So there are definitely pockets where there are projects, and it would be great to see more projects so that people have access to them, not just in BC, but across Canada for sure.
Laura, lots of validation for what you're saying in people's comments here as we're scrolling through them, just about the importance of mentoring and what a difference it's made in people's careers. People talking here about the fact that they were thinking of leaving early childhood, but they got involved in some form of mentoring, and in fact, it renewed their practice. So very much validating what your findings came out with.
There's a great question here, Dawn.
Yeah.
And Laura, what has been the biggest obstacle with the peer mentoring project? I'm actually curious myself.
We've had no problems recruiting at all. I mean, there's been such interest. Educators in all of the communities were eager to take part. If anything, it was more just sometimes the logistics of things, sort of the behind the scenes kind of logistics. But I would say educators have been ready for this. They've been wanting this. And again, I want to just continue to speak highly of Westcoast Childcare Resource Center, EBC. Capacity had already been developed within the field. Educators already knew about peer mentoring. So no, I would say I was perhaps pleasantly surprised at just how it came together.
People were very willing to come along with very little information sometimes. They were very willing, which says a lot about the early childhood educators, and really warms my heart. But it's also some kind, terrifying that we're like, do you want support? Yes. Where do I sign up?
This is true. This is true. Yeah, I do recall a conversation like that, Pam, at the orientation where
yes.
looking around the room at the people that had jumped on a plane to come to Kamloops to an orientation about something that they, they'd received like 2 paragraphs about or something. But we know we have, when you're working with early childhood educators, you're working with wonderful people.
Yeah. Yep. And I think we were very lucky in timing in that the work got completed just before COVID hit the ground.
Mm.
So,
yeah, we were able to visit 15 of the 17 locations where we did interviews and focus groups, and 2 we did through Zoom. So it was amazing timing that way.
Yeah. Maybe one more, Laura, and then we'll let you get back into your presentation. And this one's from Carla. Carla, great to see you on the webinar here tonight. Go Jets, go. Will this be an ongoing project in that the mentoring project has profoundly impacted on ECEs within BC?
That's a great question. I think at this point that's an unknown. I'd love to see it continue. I really believe that that we've got additional capacity. We've got educators who have now, we've got 200 educators now that have taken part, and they know the value. I know when we talked with all of the different educators at the end of the project, they wanted to see it carry on, and they wanted to see it carry on not just with themselves but with other educators as well. So I'm hopeful, really hopeful that we can carry on with it.
Excellent. Thanks, Laura. We'll let you resume the presentation. Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for your questions, everyone. And sorry we couldn't get to everything. So I'd like to just share a quote here from a facilitator from the Vancouver group. My experience as a facilitator for the Peer Mentoring Project provided opportunities for educators to be part of an extended support group, proving extremely successful in preventing burnout and alleviating the many stresses related to caring for and guiding children. It expanded their support network greatly, giving them hope for the future, and it encouraged them to stay instead of switching paths at a time when we need them the most. So there were multiple layers of support for early childhood educators. They received support from their peer mentor, their facilitator, group members, the greater ECE community, as well as guest speakers. And this happened at a monthly face-to-face meeting, weekly meetings with their peer mentors, and online through a private platform. And an educator out of Prince George said the project was what kept me from leaving. I was really disillusioned and frustrated. I felt isolated, and I would think, I can't do this. However, through the project, the educator connected with another early childhood educator in her community, one with decades of experience in the field. And she says, we would come together and mutually support one another. I would say we built a friendship, but it was more than that. It was a confidential space, and there was no judgment, just acceptance. So in my research, I have found that through peer mentoring projects within a community of practice, educators increase their connections with the ECE community, and they increase both their mentor and their educator efficacy. Again, their confidence in their own abilities to be a peer mentor and to be an educator. And these things then help educators to sustain their practice and avoid burnout. So in this image, you can see the range of participant experience in the project. We had educators who had been in the field for less than 5 years, some with 21 to 30 years of experience, and everything in between. So in this province, and I would say across Canada, we have a very strong group of ECEs. We also have a dedicated group of retired ECE instructors and or practitioners. So how do we tap into that collective wisdom and experience? That's a question that we're going to continue to look at. This project provided ECEs with a safe, supportive space to talk about the real issues facing ECEs on a daily basis. So what is it like to know that there are no substitute ECEs and you are sick? What do you do when you have a child in your program who is exhibiting difficult behavior and you don't know what to do? Where do you go at the end of the day when you are physically and mentally exhausted and you are transitioning from work into your other time? What do you do with your day? I think we also need to acknowledge that most of the ECEs in our province, and I would say across Canada, are female. How does gender factor into the working conditions for ECEs? So again, I'll read some of this quote from Charlene. Imagine the possibilities of pods of educators around the province gaining strength with each new group member, realizing that we are not alone and that we share the same struggles. Wouldn't it be wonderful if every educator had this opportunity? And imagine the effects that this would have on recruitment and retention. So I'm just looking at time. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. And I know that it's hard to read as well, but this is included in the files. But this was created by one of the facilitators and a participant. And they talked about how their sense of being as ECEs was impacted by participating in the project. So educators came together as peer mentors within a community of practice, and they discussed their experiences in the field. And they discussed things like workplace issues, challenges in the ECE field, some of the things that you've already identified in terms of low wages, high turnover, short-staffed, being burnt out, or self-care, as well as their experiences in the project. This included learning from each other in terms of culture and language, learning about different programs, sharing different perspectives, supporting each other through pedagogical resources and ideas. So the methods and the practices of being an educator, learning and reflecting together, and developing professional friendships and peer mentoring as self-care. And one educator from Quesnel said, I think every ECE should experience this. We all need to come together as a community and support each other. So now I'm going to share a video with you. And this video is about 6 minutes long, and it just shows a little bit more about the project and features facilitators and participants in the project.
The government has been really wise in supporting this project and helping early childhood educators be honored in a way that normally we are asked to participate in things, but there's no remuneration.
This project was an opportunity to come together, to share their experiences, share their thoughts and feelings with each other.
You guys took that one small step for us to be able to take another step. And now we're walking together.
The peer mentoring workshop gave us a space, an intention, and sort of a structure to come together and share our individual journeys and our different experiences.
And it became a safe place for conversations to happen and for sharing to happen. And a lot of people became very vulnerable in these conversations and felt supported. It was really remarkable. And it really ended up creating stronger relationships that perhaps wouldn't have been touched on prior.
There's so much knowledge that I gained from this project through mentorship from Sandy and from the big group that helps directly my ECE profession.
She helped me a lot. Like, we just bounced back and forth, and she gave me so much advice.
It's been a really great support system to have as we're working, and then having the opportunity to meet once a week and just check in with each other.
Getting together with a peer mentor, somebody that is also in the field working, has opened up different perspectives on how things are done.
We visited each other's centers at different weeks, and we got a little tour and got to kind of see their the way they ran the program, their routine, some of their tools and manipulatives, and it was just things I'd never thought of.
I was able to learn more than I ever knew because I've only been in the field for a year and a half, and so it was awesome to be able to bounce ideas off of her and have her answer my questions.
I found it to be a safe space, and knowing that it's confidential is huge.
We tend to stay in our boxes, and I think it's to our detriment.
I've seen a lot of turnover of ECEs in the field, new graduates, people interested in becoming ECEs. They come, they stay a little while, and then they're gone. So I was hoping that maybe my years of experience could help and give them some information and feedback.
I think we lose young graduates because they come out of the field feeling that they're ready, that they can take it on, and they quickly learn that they need more support, not only from mentors, but also higher education. And there needs to be support in place to gain that education, because it is not affordable for us to continue our educations at this time with the wages that we're given.
Financial is a really big issue in our childcare program, trying to get the funding to be able to maintain staff, paying our staff what they deserve. It's, they deserve a lot more than they get paid.
If there's nothing else that gets through this, is for us to be able to share that with the government and say, this is important. It's an important field. We need early childhood educators, and we need to be valued for the work that we do.
Going forward, one of the most important attributes for somebody getting into this field is the ability to look into the future and think about children and early childhood in terms of the inheritances that they're going to be living in and living through in terms of what's going on in the world, and say, okay, we need to equip these children. This is why when I say early childhood education, I really mean it, because it's not just about caring for children anymore. It's about teaching children to be in this world and to live well in the world.
It's a community that raises a child. Like, it's not just one person, it's all of us that are raising these children, right? So we have to educate them so they can become these great humans that they are.
Everybody, whether they're in the field for 2 years or 25 years, is constantly learning and developing in their own way.
The thing that I took most home from it was the relational aspect. While I'd heard of other centers or different teachers in the community, I had not met or got to see quite a few of them.
The time we've spent together has given us both insight into not only our personalities, but our cultural backgrounds.
Oh, yes.
Now I have some new connections in my community, in the field that I work in, that I can follow up with and keep learning from.
And I feel that now, if there was something I was struggling with or wanting to explore, I kind of have a little bit of a team that I could reach out for.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it continues, and I found it very beneficial to be a new ECE, and I hope that there's more new ECs that are able to experience what I've experienced.
That's great. Laura, you may have to activate your microphone again on the top of the screen there.
Perfect, thank you.
Perfect, great, thanks.
Okay. Just getting my slide going again, and I'm really aware of the time as well, so don't worry. Looking at that. So this project gave us a window into what is possible. What if all ECEs were given time to access professional development in a similar manner to teachers who in BC who receive 6 full days per year? I know there was a question someone asked, were there any challenges or difficulties? We did the best that we could, but again, the project needed to take place on evenings and weekends. And I dream of a time when educators can receive professional development during the day. What if all ECEs had the opportunity to be part of a community of practice? What if all ECEs had the opportunity to have a peer mentor? What difference would that make? So the next 3 slides, I think I've got some quotes here, but just in terms of time, I'm going to go through these a little bit quicker than I was anticipating. And again, you'll be able to read these later. Excuse me. But I would like to just talk about this for a couple of minutes here. In terms of ideas that you might be listening to this presentation and thinking about your own context or your own area and wondering what you might be able to do. So these are just some ideas for you. You can reach out to an educator that you know. It might just be to check in on them to find out how they're doing. Can you contact your local professional association? Do you have one? Are you part of one? If you don't have one, perhaps it's contacting a group of early childhood educators that you know and starting from there. Gathering a group of educators and seeing if there is interest in forming a community of practice with peer mentoring. Create a group charter or a reason for meeting. Relationship and trust, as you've been hearing, are huge. Who in your community might be interested in taking part in this? Maybe post-secondary faculty, ECE leaders, funders. In the projects that I have been involved in, it is the ECEs who are creating this together, and the wisdom is coming from the ECEs. You can talk to an ECE that you respect, talk to your manager or supervisor, check out the peer mentoring website. We'll have that on one of our slides. Don't be afraid about starting small. We certainly did. One educator in this project worked with her manager to bring in yoga for the educators. Another educator started up a peer mentoring project within the large early learning program that she works in. So this is a quote from Pam. The goal of the project is to both build capacity and leave a legacy. And I see we've only got a couple of minutes, but I want to thank you so much for being here tonight, for taking time out of your busy day to be here. And you can see that we do have a project website, and we would encourage you to take a look at that. Our professional video is there, as well as the resources that the educators shared from the project. Not hearing you, Dawn.
We can't hear you, Dawn.
Of course, here's me handling the controls and not turning my mic on. So, folks, if you do have a bit of time, we do have some more questions, and I'm sure Laura is more than happy to answer them, but fully appreciate it if you need to get away, because it is 10 o'clock out on the East Coast, 10:30 in Newfoundland, Labrador. So we appreciate that it's late. But Laura, that video had people buzzing, emotionally buzzing, right, Pam? Yeah, Pam, you're shaking your head. Yeah. And a lot of people were asking if we could share the link to that, and we will. We'll send that out with our follow-up information. Great question here, Laura, that I thought was really important, because and I'm not suggesting here that it was just focused on program, like just childcare centers, but a few folks were asking about, what about family or home childcare? Does mentoring work there? And then we actually had some comments in and around people in family childcare that actually had done this themselves, working with other family childcare providers. But just your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So yes, we definitely had educators from family childcare programs that were part of this peer mentoring project, and we're continuing to work on additional videos. And actually, I've just was looking at a rough cut of a video where 2 educators were actually talking about the importance of having this available for people who are working in their homes in family childcare. And educators I've had involved even in the pilot project just spoke about, and again, I'm not saying this is everyone's experience, but some of the educators talked about how isolating it was. And again, how, they loved it. They absolutely loved it, because there's so many opportunities and the ability to build relationship with the children and the families, but the isolating nature of the work. And so I think that's what I see as common, whether it's isolation because you are the only educator in that program, or sometimes you're working with others and you still feel isolated. we need to be able to share our stories. So absolutely, I see this as being something that would absolutely work for people working out of their homes.
Mm-hmm. Pam, anything from you there?
I really just liked one of the comments, which was, this was a feast for my ears. And I really needed this. A lot of people really wanting to make connections, feeling like they have made a connection tonight. They want to make more connections. People want a mentor. Some people should think about being a mentor. But how you do that, Laura, and you did touch on this, without judgment, by maintaining the confidentiality, by meeting people in their journey where they are and not judging, I wouldn't done it that way, or in my way, my day, I did it this way. It really has to be a meeting of people in a different way. And one of my observations was there was a person who was younger coming into the field and a person who had been in the field for a while. And that more senior person said, I am now energized in my work to go back, right? This is a two-way street. This isn't, I've been here a while, I'm going to help you out. This is a two-way street. And that really has to be set out in almost your ground rules to start.
Yeah.
It really does. Yeah, you want there to be acceptance on both for both peer mentors. When I was reading a little bit of Brené Brown, just that difference between belonging and fitting in. When we're trying to fit in, then we're trying to use the right language and we're trying to talk the right way, and maybe we're kind of minimizing our experience of the day. But when there's true belonging, then I can say I've had a rough day. I can say I don't have an answer for this situation and I'd like some support. So again, it's thinking about what contexts need to be present. In this current research, educators talked about the difference between being part of the community of practice versus just going into a random workshop.
Yeah.
And again, their experience was, when they go into a workshop, and again, none of us have gone into a workshop physically for quite a while now, but when they would, just go over and sit by people they know, and they wouldn't necessarily engage on a really personal level. They contrasted that with what happens in the community of practice, where it's real, where people they're authentic, they're genuine, they're sharing because of the level of trust that's there in the group, and they're not there to prove something. People are there to listen and to support. So I think there's a lot of takeaways for all of us to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
Beautiful.
So a lot of comments here. Interesting, Laura and Pam. A lot of comments just in and around getting PD days, and people saying, wouldn't it be great if we had, similar to what school systems have, where they shut down and there's PD. Just an interesting note. The only province in Canada, or only jurisdiction in Canada, that actually shuts down their entire sector for 2 days during the year, in which ECs get paid and they purposely engage in professional development, is PEI. PEI does that. Yeah. And PEI has a more evolved system than most of the rest of Canada. And in fact, I often say that we should pay more attention to what's going on in PEI. I know it's a small province, but that's not the issue. The issue is how they have built an actual system in PEI, and PD days are a part of it. So something for people to be aware of. And I am seeing, so Florence, great to see you here. Florence is, I believe, from Dauphin, Manitoba, and I know Florence. To your point earlier, Laura, she is a retired ECE and director and still mentoring people and looks forward to and wants to do that. So there is that wealth of knowledge that you spoke of.
Oh, exactly. And that was something that I don't have all the answers, but it's a question, right? Like, how do we tap into that collective wisdom? I still remember in one of the communities interviewing a pair of peer mentors, a newer educator with someone who actually had just retired. So they've been in the field for 30 plus years. And they talked about, it's funny how these stories stay with me, but they talked about how they had already met, they were going to meet like at 8 a.m. before the shift started for the newer educator. And the more experienced peer mentor educator looked at her and said, "You're not well. Like, you shouldn't even be here." And the new educator was like, "Well, I know I'm not well, but like I like just feeling guilty about calling in sick and being away." And the more experienced educator who, you know, she's actually at the end of her career. She's no longer actively working. She just said, "No, you need to go home. You're sick. And you have the right to set a boundary and say, physically, I'm unwell." And that helped the new educator to have the confidence to be able to say, "I can't come in today." And you know what? Life went on. But again, the impact that educators can have on each other, and it's shared, it's back and forth.
Yep. For sure. All right, we're at 6 minutes after the top of the hour. Pam, anything else from you?
No, it's just been really an enjoyable experience, and I want to thank everybody for coming out even on their late night with not a PD day to be here. Really appreciate that.
That's great. And I do want to also recognize Emily Gowlick, who is not here today, from the Early Childhood Educators of BC. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us here today, but do want to thank ECBC for their involvement in this, as well as Pam and Laura. The final word goes to you here tonight.
Oh, great. Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming out. As you have already said, Pam, thank you, Doan, for everything you've done behind the scenes tonight and just organizing this. Pam, thank you so much for your ongoing support. It's just been, this has been great. I've really enjoyed being able to share this, and I hope that everyone has gotten a real insight into the number of people that have been involved in this. My name might be out here, but there's a team standing behind me, and that's the only thing that has gotten me here tonight. So yeah, thank you to everybody.
Great. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for joining us here tonight. Stay well, stay safe. And as Laura has said, the work you do is so valuable, so important for children, for families, for communities, for Canada. Always remember that. Thank you and good night.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Bye.